Hi, I'm Lauren Epstein, the host of The Lauren Epstein Show. Welcome back for another episode here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Today we are doing a really different show on a subject that you may or may not have heard of, but is going to become more and more in your awareness in the coming years. And it's about something called universal basic income. There's actually a few words for it, but we'll go with that one. Some people call it basic income guarantee. Some people call it the citizen's income or unconditional basic income. Fundamentally, what it is, it's a new kind of welfare regime in which citizens or permanent residents of a country receive a regular, livable, and unconditional sum of money from the government. So this unconditional income should be sufficient to meet a person's basic needs at or above the poverty line. We're going to talk about all the different things, but basically, so you know what it is that everybody that lives in America would get a bit of money. Now, this is actually happening in America. In Alaska, the residents of Alaska get a sum of money between $1,000 and $2,000 a year from the oil companies. So that's like in place. If you're 6 months old, you get that, and you get that for as long as you live in Alaska. And we're going to talk about the efficacy of these things, but from what I understood was that in Alaska, relative to the lower 48, there is a smaller difference between the super rich and the super poor. And I think you really don't want to have the super poor, right? I don't think we mind having the super rich, but having really, really poor people is not good for the economy. It's not good for your neighbor. It drags us all down.
But we're going to for them.
Oh, wait, I'm going to introduce my guest because I don't want to get too far into it because I am definitely not the expert. With me today are seriously experts, people who have written books and are super knowledgeable about this. First, I'm going to introduce Steve Shafarman. Steve is a member of the Basic Income Earth Network and the U.S. Basic Income Guarantee Network. He's also the co-founder of Basic Income Action. He lives in Washington, D.C., and is the author of 7 books. His most recent book is called Basic Income Imperative for Peace, Justice, Liberty, and Personal Dignity. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you, Lauren. Happy to be here.
And also with me, and boy, I have been practicing this, but forgive me all, I hate to say this name and not do it quite right. It's Veronique du Rugy.
Yes, exactly. Veronique du Rugy.
Du Rugy. She is a senior research fellow at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. If you're not familiar with the Mercatus Center, you should be. They have a lot of amazing, intelligent people producing a lot of great stuff. She's also a nationally syndicated columnist. Her primary research interests include the U.S. economy, the federal budget, homeland security, taxation, tax competition, and financial privacy. Her popular weekly charts published by the Mercatus Center address economic issues ranging from lessons on creating sustainable economic growth to the implications of government tax and fiscal policies. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Did I get all that right?
Yeah, mostly. It's getting longer as I age, and each time it gets me down a little bit. That's fine.
Well, welcome to the show. So we're going to just jump right in, and I think, since we have 52 minutes, I think the first thing I'd like to cover is just like a little bit of what it is and what its history is. So who would like to start?
Sure. I'm happy to.
Yeah.
It is, as you stated in the introduction, a universal basic income. So everyone, as a matter of right, would have some income for food, clothes, and shelter, the necessities. And the history, in fact, goes back to Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine. James Madison said some favorable things along these lines. In the 1890s and 1930s, debates about economic security drove major political reforms, the progressives and populists in the 1890s, and enactment of Social Security and other reforms in the 1930s.
So why did Jefferson back then, why did they think this would be a good idea?
Well, we all know that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are supposed to be inalienable rights. And if we just think about it concretely, life requires at least a bit of money for food, clothes, and shelter. And Jefferson there are a number of quotes from Jefferson and from James Madison, John Adams, saying that a society has a responsibility to see that everyone can participate as citizens though the most full-on expression of it was Thomas Paine, who was best known for writing Common Sense that helped spark the American Revolution. In 1797, wrote a pamphlet called Agrarian Justice, in which he called for distributing cash to every adult when they become an adult, and yearly starting at the age of 50, so people can live out their lives in dignity. But more important, this was a mainstream moderate idea in the 1960s. In the 1960s, Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and economists from the right called it a negative income tax.
From the libertarian movement.
Yes.
Libertarian, not necessarily the right.
I'm happy to accept that. And Martin Luther King campaigned for it, wrote about it in his last book. And so we're just bringing back these ideas and saying that if you really want a just and sustainable society, one way to begin is to ensure that everyone can participate in society, that everyone can participate as citizens and participate in markets. And giving everyone at least a little bit of cash will do that.
And so how would you feel about that?
Well, I mean, so I'll say this as a preface to everything I will say during this show. I think one of the things that's important to understand is that economic growth is actually super important, and it is what has lifted a lot of people out of poverty from the time of Jefferson to today's time. I mean, we can question whether the distribution is fair or not, but it is out of question that economic growth, and we continue seeing it. Billions of people have been lifted out of poverty in the world in the last 40 years thanks to economic growth. Now, the standard of living today are vastly different than they were under Jefferson, and we may feel that for a lot of lower income people, it's just not enough considering today's standards. So that's the beginning of the conversation. Is like we shouldn't pretend that economic growth hasn't done just a ton of work to really alleviate real poverty. Should we be happy? Yeah. No. And there's but the thing that I think kind of is important to understand about the minimum basic income, guaranteed minimum income, however you want to understand it, is that it's radical in a sense that one, it's not a system on top of the system we have right now. It's a replacement system. Right? It's radical in that way. It's like we're taking the system right now, which is a terrible system, with hundreds of different programs that are paternalistic, telling lower income.
Let's talk about those in a second, but I want to just kind of get more of the fundamentals of the history. And based on what Steve said, did you feel like he captured? Is there anything you want to add to that?
I will say, so this idea of universality, generality, this is something that has been really libertarians, to the extent that they don't first and foremost promote economic growth to kind of and markets to lift people out of poverty and say think about how the government can do it. This concept of generality is one that has been favored by libertarians and a lot of right-wingers, because it is a simplicity, it has a beauty in its design that takes off the paternalism that bureaucrats in Washington can impose on these programs, telling people what to do. So I think Steve is correct.
So let's talk about what's wrong. Right.
Well, let's talk about what's right first, because there are actually a lot of things that are right about it. And Steve and I
let me reframe it. So what is currently wrong? In our economy right now, I'm working. I'm guessing you're all working. I feel privileged. I know that I make more money than my parents did, who made more money than their parents did, and the standard of living of the three generations have been in this country has gone up. And that's true for a lot of people, but not for everyone.
Not for a lot of people.
And not for a lot of people. Yeah. So what would we say, and we can talk about this for a while, we have 52 minutes, but what's wrong with the economy now, and without addressing the how UBI would affect it, but what's wrong with it that this could affect it?
The evidence is overwhelming that in recent decades, starting in the late 70s, income inequality has grown significantly. And most of the gains of economic growth have been captured by the top 5 or 10 or 20%. Incomes have stagnated, and relative to expectations have actually fallen for at least 40 or 50 or 60% of Americans. And that's why there's widespread anger, and many people think that's one reason that folks voted for Donald Trump, because they saw that the political system under Democrats and Republicans was not working and needed to be disrupted.
So fundamentally what you're saying is that because there's greater income equality, meaning that there's more people at the bottom and fewer people going up to the top, that is one particular problem.
Yes.
And how would you frame
that's
it?
always been the case. I mean, the top 10% is very few people compared to the 90%. And so it's not the question of the number of people. And I will disagree somewhat with Steve, not about, the evidence of income inequality, even though there actually are some debates about this, but about how much it's evolved and grown. But it's just income inequality per se is not necessarily a problem if everyone's growing. Even if the gap is growing, what people who are just like obsessed with income inequality seems to lose sight of is like they're unhappy even if the lower income people actually see their income grow significantly, let's say 40%, just the fact that the top see their income grow by 100%, that's a source.
Well, let's
to
not
them.
just, there's people
No,
who
but
are
I mean,
feel,
so what I mean is like
because people are going to feel lots of ways about lots of things.
lots. So, I mean, it's just, I have to say that there are different ways of thinking about income inequality, and there's some ways to actually think about it as if this is not necessarily like as big a problem as people say, as long as, in fact, it is the case that everyone's growing and just simply not at the same rate.
I agree emphatically. The real problem is not the inequality; it's that people at the bottom are falling farther and farther behind.
But what is actually really accurate is this feeling of stagnation that a lot of people have had in the last 20 years or since the end of the 80s. I mean, and you see it in economic growth. And during the 90s, and 3.3% average growth during the 90s, and it's been an average of 1.8 ever since. And now we're growing a little faster, and we'll see if that can be sustained. I mean, so it's just this feeling that people have is real. There's just a lot of people who've lost this feeling that when you're in America, as long as you work and you have a shot of having kids who are going to be better off than you are, and that has been lost, and that's real.
Is there any other particular problems that you would say are existing that your particular ideas around UBI would address?
Yeah, I do. Well, yes, I think that we have a system of welfare right now that is just actually quite terrible.
Right.
It's a complicated one. It's an expensive one. UBI wouldn't address this, but it's a very complicated one with hundreds of programs, many of them duplicative, all of them paternalistic. It's like the government tells you can spend that much on rent, that much on food, you can spend this on this, and it's a complicated system to navigate. And the UBI would do away with all this. You scrap all these programs, and you have just the government doing honestly what it does the best.
We'll get to the solutions. I know that you are totally, both of you, passionate about the solutions, and I promise you we'll have a lot of the show about that. So right now, when you're talking about it, I want to make sure that the listener understands that there are programs that the government has, like Section 8 housing.
33 different housing programs.
Right. So there's 33 different housing programs that give money to people to have subsidized housings. And on and on and on. There's lots of programs at the state level.
Lots of food. Maybe Steve, you know this better than I.
Yeah.
That just many different type of food subsidies.
Sure.
And by the way, policies that contradict each other. So you subsidize foods on one hand, but on the other hand, you give farm subsidies, which have the impact of actually raising the price of food. So it's totally a schizophrenic system that we have that serves a lot of special interest, and often at the detriment of lower income people.
And fundamentally, I personally believe what you're saying is at the heart of it, is that because of our system of government, special interest has really kind of taken control and hijacked these things at the expense of, they don't really care how efficient these programs are. They don't care about
it's
the general...
a huge bureaucracy, and there are a lot of people whose jobs depend on working in the existing system and distributing aid of one sort or another and following all the paperwork and the bureaucracies and...
So we're going to take a quick
break.
break.
Duplications between local, state, and federal. And
yes.
We're going to take a quick break and be right back. Hi, I'm Lauren Epstein, and you're listening to The Lauren Epstein Show, where we talk about jobs, careers, and the workplace, here on 96.7 FM. If you're interested in being on the show, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or email me at Lorne, Lorne, at electriccow.com. You can check out our Facebook page, which is Lauren Epstein, and also our Mixcloud account. So if you go to mixcloud.com, Lauren Epstein, you'll find our shows. Thanks so much. Welcome back. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein. You're listening to The Lauren Epstein Show here on 96.7 FM. So we're talking about universal basic income with Steve Shafarman and Veronique de Rugy. I got it. Oh, man, I'm so excited. And we talked about kind of like what's wrong with the system. So let's talk about, how this structure kind of came about that. Oh, go ahead.
There's one more thing
please.
About what's wrong with the system. It's like the way it is designed creates massive disincentive for people to actually work. So when you have a system where, let's say, if you work an extra hour, suddenly you lose all your housing subsidies, or you lose the earned income tax credit, or you lose whatever, all those different things that they are, it means that the marginal tax rate of working one more hour is like infinite. Right, it's like suddenly you lose income, right? And working is important. Working is good, and because for multiple reasons, and we have a system that is so fragmented that it creates massive disincentive to work. Now, some people claim that with UBI there'll be some issues like this, but right now the current system, it can't be any worse than the system we have.
It's what economists call poverty traps. And the way a lot of programs are set up, as Veronique said, if you work one more hour, you would lose a certain benefit that might be worth a significant amount.
So it's not that people don't want to work, it's that they're punished if they do work.
Talk to poor and working people. People want to work.
Right.
People get dignity from work. People's lives are more meaningful when they work. People want to work. They want to participate as citizens, but often are trapped in poverty. And for the poor, in order to get to a job, you might have to spend 2 hours taking 3 different buses to get from where you live to where the job is.
If I can give one concrete example, the Mercatus Center just published a paper by Scott Winship, and looking at the question of participation rate in the economy, which has been going down, and Scott has always been an advocate saying,
when you say participation rate, what do you mean?
The fact that the participation rate of
the number of
people actively working has been going down, and Scott has always been someone who said, maybe we shouldn't care about this. It depends on the reason why people aren't working. If people aren't working because they're retiring earlier, or if they're not working because they're going back to school, that's just not a big deal. However, what he ended up finding is disability, Social Security disability program, there's a connection between the two of people actually not working because of that particular program that creates real disincentive to work. And of course, this is made even worse, that disincentive, when the economy is not doing that great, right? When your prospect for work are just kind of crappy. And so it's like those two things together just is hurtful. And as Steve said, it's people get a lot more than income out of working. And it's problematic when the system is actually, giving incentive for them not to engage.
And so, I'm really glad we're having this conversation. So where is it working? Is there an example that, and both of you, point to and say, that is a great system, let's do that?
Alaska is the best example of a basic income. And since 1982, every resident of Alaska, 6 months or older, gets a cash payment from the permanent fund. It's called the permanent fund dividend, and that's from oil royalties. The amount varies depending on
let's
market
talk about how
conditions.
it came about, right? So oil companies came in and said, we're going to drill in Alaska.
The oil was discovered in Alaska in the early 70s.
Yep.
And the Alaska Constitution, which Alaska only became a state in 1959, the Constitution explicitly says that the natural wealth belongs to all of the people. And so when oil was discovered, there was a widespread debate of, okay, well, what does this mean for our economy and for our society? They created the Alaska Permanent Fund, which is a kind of sovereign wealth fund where a percentage of oil royalties go into this fund, and the money is then invested in a diverse portfolio of stocks and bonds and other assets. And beginning in 1982, began distributing a dividend from the permanent fund. So
to every citizen.
Permanent fund dividend to every citizen.
And it's roughly 2,000.
The amount varies from year to year. They announce it every October.
But on average. But so that first, there are two things that's important to actually, like when we think about the Alaska case, is first, this is, private money, really. It's private money. So it doesn't have a lot of the problems that the universal basic income or may have, or the current welfare system, in that it's government money and it's funded with taxes and with some of the distortions that we know, right? The other thing is it's an amount of money that's like important enough that it makes a difference in people's lives, in a lot of people's lives. I mean, $2,000 when you're a low-income person is a big deal. And but it's just nowhere near enough to really create this incentive to work. So the question with the basic income is first, like, the distortion created by how you found it. You pay for it, but then people say, rightfully so, the current system is funded with the same distortionary taxes, but it's also that question of, is it true that maybe the universal basic income still has create some distortion?
We'll definitely talk about that.
So
let's talk now about where is it working?
Alaska is interesting.
Aside from Alaska, where else, either in the country or outside the country?
There have been pilot programs in a number of places, in the U.S., in Canada, and Europe. Back in the late 60s, when this was a mainstream idea, the Federal Office of Economic Opportunity set up a series of experiments in New Jersey, Denver, Chicago, Seattle, in urban and rural communities, where they said to poor people, I think it was about 6,000 people in total, we're going to guarantee that you have this basic income. And then they had social scientists just checking to see what effect it had on family structure, on work hours.
And this was on top of anything else. This wasn't a removing.
On top of everything else. This was a guaranteed basic income, guaranteed cash payments. And
how much was it?
It was a very small amount, but the experiments were widely varied. So it was half of the poverty line to 2/3 of the poverty line. So it was designed to just ensure that people knew they could meet their basic needs. And what they found was a slight decline in total work hours, but when the full analysis was done, actually not until many years later, what they saw was that the decline in work hours was mostly teenagers staying in school and wives staying home with their young kids. So those are socially good things. There was a very slight decline among the husbands, who were the primary breadwinners. But again, on the final analysis, that was that when someone was out of a job for any reason, they would take an extra month or two to look for a better job rather than grabbing the first job they could find. There were similar projects in several cities in Canada, and the most notable, a town called Dauphin in Manitoba province, a town of 10,000 people where everyone below the poverty line got a guaranteed basic income.
And what was the outcome?
The outcome, interestingly enough, because of a political change in the province and the country, the data wasn't analyzed until several decades later. And when the economists rediscovered the data, which had been locked up in crates, and did the analysis, they found significant health benefits, significant education benefits, people starting businesses. There were articles just a few years ago describing Dauphin as the town that eliminated poverty. There were pilot projects privately funded in Namibia and Kenya in Africa. There was a project in several poor villages in India funded by UNICEF of India. And everywhere this has been done, the outcomes have shown that poor people are smart and sensible and will spend the money in their self-interest and improve their quality of life.
And is there any other places that you've seen where this is working at any level?
No, I think, first Steve was definitely the expert on this, and everything he said sounds accurate. I think we can't wish away. I mean, we can't kind of ignore entirely the disincentive to work that has been found. We can spin it and saying, well, it's for a good reason or whatever. But I think it's important to remember this, and it's also important to understand that this was done at smaller level, at local levels, right. And not at the financial scale that we're talking about if we were to move to that system.
So there's no country right now on the planet that's doing it?
No.
The Scandinavian countries have
experimented.
There are experiments underway. Finland is now starting an experiment. There are experiments being planned again in Canada, in Holland, Scotland, Kenya. So there are a number of experiments underway, but as Veronique said, it's not being done at the broad social level so you can really see the widespread effects. And I think the pilot project we really need is a city, state, or country for 2 or 3 years.
So then the question is, okay, so if we were going to do this, how do you think we should start?
Well, I think it's unquestionable that if we were going to have, there's no question that we need to be all in agreement that this should be to replace the current system that we have.
And let's talk about what the current system is. That means what?
All welfare programs. All of them, and so
now, does that mean corporate welfare or just?
Independent of the conversation about the basic, the minimum basic income, we should get rid of corporate welfare. That's not corporate welfare needs to go. Period. I mean, this is not. But I'm talking about anti-poverty programs.
So unemployment insurance.
I would do this because I mean, what's important to understand is like, yes, you want to give people the ability to have this basic income. But what you also need for it to really work fully is you have to not have disincentive to work. And there's a lot of empirical evidence that unemployment benefits, as good as it sounds, if it's too high and it lasts for too long, creates or delays the incentive to work. So you need to remove these barriers.
I have a question. Have you ever been on unemployment insurance?
No. I've been very lucky.
Yeah. So I have, and I can tell you, I have never made my nut based on unemployment insurance. In Virginia, in the state of Virginia, I was on unemployment insurance in the mid-90s. It's the exact same rate today, which is like 22 years later. It's like $300 and some odd a week.
But maybe you would have if your options were actually not appealing than being a radio host. If your job is hard labor and there are a lot of people have jobs that are honestly much less pleasant than ours.
Yeah.
And you can't blame them for saying, you know what, I'm just going to kind of wait a little. So I think I don't think we're good judges.
No, I get it, but I don't know I'm talking about just in Virginia. I don't know what it is elsewhere, but $300 and some odd $345 a week is not really enough to like survive somebody. I mean, 20 some odd years ago, it just like it was not enough.
At the federal level, think about after the recession, right? There was this whole debate.
I really was getting to the point of should we still have unemployment insurance?
I don't think so.
So you're saying get rid of any money that transfers from the government, state, local,
and I would be even more extreme. It's like, they would never fly, but I would get rid of even minimum wage laws that disincentivize employers from hiring low income people. in an ideal case, just you have to do it on the redistribution side, but also on the labor market side.
Yes, and one way to think about basic income in that context is when everyone knows that they have some basic amount, $500 a month, $600, $800, $1,000, whatever it is, people will have the dignity and the opportunity to tell a worker, I'm not going to take your job for minimum wage. I deserve more than that. And employers, will then have to negotiate with workers on a more equal basis. And
it's very rare that I say get rid of the minimum wage and the unemployment benefit, and someone says yes, and I'm just like, I'm in shock.
Well, I think that we're all. Because I think that we living in D.C., we see the dysfunction, and everything you said, everything you both said, I think we can all agree, all these programs don't make sense. Right? What's going on doesn't make sense. It's not really working for people. There's definitely, more people, like the velocity of people becoming wealthier is slowing down for the folks below the top 70 or 80%. And it's slowed down so much that's why there's a lot of discontent and salaries have not gone up. So anything that would make sense, I think we're like, yes, if that makes sense. And what you're all saying.
And one way that I like to speak of basic income is the fact that it's universal and unconditional. So whatever is the amount,
right,
it will go to working folks, it will go to homeless veterans, it will go to Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey. Give it to everyone so that in this regard, at least, you and I and all of your listeners are equal to Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey, that we all have a greater sense of being full citizens and participants in the market and in the political system. And then I think we can move toward creating something more like a true democracy.
Or we're going to take a quick break and come back. Hi, I'm Lauren Epstein. Every week I talk about jobs and careers on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia, at 10 a.m. Mondays. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, here on The Lauren Epstein Show. Today we're talking about universal basic income. Veronique, you were going to...
I was just going to say, I want to disagree with you about something. You kind of put together the fact that people or incomes is not growing and this. These are two separate issues. The government is not the one who's going to make the economy going. It's not. The market, entrepreneurs, businesses, and workers. Workers are like an important part of that. What this is about safety net. It's about redistribution. We should not mix the two together.
And more than safety net, it's an absolute floor,
right,
so that people know that they can participate.
Right.
And we shouldn't be under the illusion that because we have a guaranteed minimum income, the economy is going to grow.
Right. But here's where I disagree. The government has been, in a lot of ways, co-opted by big business, entrepreneurship, to favor it. So there's this huge, favoring of big business. Corporations are supremely... when corporations aren't paying their fair share, and we wonder why those people are getting richer and richer, it's not because they're smarter or they're working harder. It's because they've gamed the system.
But the reason why the economy is not growing...
Let me finish. Because people are gaming the system at all levels. People who are poor are trying to game the system, but people at the upper rich, they're not just doing this because they want to be wealthy. They are becoming wealthy because they are gaming the system. The lobbyists... the policies, the tax laws, the tax laws are huge. They're not for poor people. The tax laws for poor people below $250,000 are in that form that you get sent, which is just a few pages. It's not that complicated. So I'm saying it because I do think that the wealthy have been in the way of poor people becoming wealthier. And not that I think that it's some kind of malevolent, we want to hurt people, but it's because they just don't seem to have enough. It makes no sense to me why someone who is a billionaire or a 2 billionaire or a 3 billionaire does things to become... They don't work harder to get that extra billion.
Right.
They set the system up and they've gamed it. And that's a problem.
With the help of politicians who are always happy to serve special interests.
Exactly.
But I think blaming the whole thing on that... believe me,
I'm not blaming the whole thing on anything. I'm saying this is a part of the system breakdown.
It's one of the things where this unhealthy relationship between corporation and the government is a big problem, but it's not the whole thing.
Nothing's the whole thing.
No.
This is a whole system problem. Like what you're saying about if we do this, then we also have to get rid of the minimum wage, and we have to do this, and we have to do this. And I completely agree that it is not one thing that's going to fix our economy or fix the world that we live in.
Well, and I want to come back to something that you've both touched on. And there's actually a recent study by the Roosevelt Institute showing that if we have a basic income, it will boost economic growth significantly. And in fact, we just saw the Trump Republican tax cuts, which primarily go to the wealthy and to the big corporations. If you took the same amount of money and distributed it as a basic income, it would generate tremendous demand for goods and services. And economists have argued that this will boost economic growth significantly more than the Trump Republican tax cuts.
So on the individual side of the tax cut, actually,
yes,
the vast majority goes to the middle class and lower income people. And I will disagree with that. I was a fervent supporter of the reduction of the corporate income tax rate, because what people don't seem to understand is corporations don't pay taxes, and they shift the burden of the tax on people. And that's, by lowering investments, because by paying lower dividends, but also lower wages for laborers. So there are a lot of good reasons related to economic growth to really cut the corporate income tax. And but anyway.
Yeah, but economists have been saying for many years that the real problem in the U.S. economy is the lack of demand. And when everyone has a basic income, regular folks will demand goods and services and promote economic growth from the bottom up.
One of the reasons that we have that I do this show is because I think that I have been disabused of things that I thought were true. When I have my guests on who have a different life experience or have a different, like we did a show on diversity, and my guests were talking about diversity in a way that I really had never contextualized. This young woman I work with was saying how her father was like, I don't know why you young people keep changing jobs, because he's had only one job for 30 years. And it's not our choice that we change jobs. He just doesn't understand that companies fire people quickly and people get laid off quickly.
And the skills that are required with computers and technology
exactly. So
evolving so fast.
I think generally speaking, because we have such a, bifurcate is not the word, but such a dispersed experience of being an American, that we don't know what it's like to be poor. I mean, I've been poor, but we don't know what it's like to be poor or to be, like here in Arlington, if you're making $200,000 a year, you're just making it, because a house is $1 million, and people wouldn't understand that. If you live in, Minneapolis, you're like, wow, that's a lot of money. But here it's just kind of getting by. So I appreciate both of you sharing your ideas. I think it's important for us as citizens to understand what it's like to be in the shoes of other Americans, and what is it like for us to interact in this very complex web, which we have been doing less and less of, I think, as a culture.
And if the basic income is, say, $500 a month, well, for someone in Kansas or Minnesota or West Virginia, any rural area in this country, that's a significant improvement in their quality of life.
Well, let's talk about let's talk about doing it, right? Let's say the three of us are kings and queens of America, and we can just. So you're saying take away all of the other systems, and then what would we do?
Well, then you put it in place. But we have to understand it's very expensive. We're not saving money, right? I mean, because it's not necessarily what sound like a lot of money. But it's to everyone. So it's a massive
But what
financial.
would we take if we took away all those things? And maybe one of you has the numbers. But how much would we save if we took away all those things?
We don't save money. We don't.
We don't save money if we don't spend.
Depending on how you do it. If you really you can do it be even. If you really get rid of everything, and that includes Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, sure, you can do this, but otherwise it's like it's not, it's expensive.
It's expensive, but it's not just what you get rid of at the federal level.
Yeah.
It's also the changes in state and local programs and the cutting of those programs. It's also corporate welfare, which you mentioned, and we have this absurd debate about which state is going to give Jeff Bezos and Amazon
I
$5
agree.
billion?
I totally agree. It's completely ridiculous. You just take what we call the tax expenditures.
Yes,
I mean
that was my next topic.
Tax expenditures. So a lot of
explain tax expenditures.
So tax expenditure is basically any changes to the tax code that is targeted for a particular activity or a particular reason, like,
for example.
And so the child tax credit is it's a diversion from taxing the whole tax base, right? It's listed as a tax expenditure, and there's a table in the budget. Everyone can, if you Google, tax expenditure budget, you'll get that table, so you can all look at it. There are 177 programs. I'll say that a lot of the tax expenditure that people target as a tax expenditure that we should get rid of, I'm against, because the reason why they're there is because they alleviate the double taxation of income. So like in the old system, having a deferral for the corporate income tax, that was because income abroad was already taxed. Anyway, I mean, I'll spare you the details, but all of the ones, like for instance the healthcare, the healthcare deduction for employees through their employers is the biggest tax expenditure and is a handout to those who have a job in a company that provides a healthcare system. It is expensive. It is distortive.
So when you say it, you're talking about money that I would get as an employee for the company paying for my insurance.
No, it's the tax break that the company doesn't have to. They can expend. They basically can deduct it.
Yeah, they can deduct it as an expense.
Yes, exactly.
But they can deduct everything they spend as an expense.
Yeah, but some of them make sense, and some of them are justified, like labor.
But
right?
everything that a company spends money on is an expense.
But not when it's targeted for a particular
right.
service.
It's the targeting that complicates everything.
It's the targeting.
And one of the things that I discuss in Basic Income Imperative is if we have a basic income and everyone knows that they have this income for food, clothes, and shelter, at least $500, $800, $1,000 a month to every adult citizen, then we could have a much simpler tax code. We could even have a truly flat income tax. So if the basic income is tax-free, then you tax whatever people earn at some flat rate, and the net effect is perfectly progressive.
So, Steve, because we're asking, how would we roll this thing out?
Well,
set it up for us. I wake up tomorrow and it's Steve World.
It's Steve World, and I think we start with a basic income of maybe $500 a month to every adult citizen, and then
above 18.
Above 18. Some people would include legal permanent residents. And many people would like to see a parallel program of a basic income for children. So that might be $100 or $200 a month paid to the mother or other primary parent. And at the same time, we begin to cut or eliminate everything that becomes superfluous.
So tell me, what would we cut and eliminate? Because we're doing it all in one day.
Well, when I'm talking about... my bottom line is that we should obey the classic dictum, do no harm. So if someone is disabled and is getting special Social Security disability income and unemployment and such, and they're currently getting $1,200 or $1,500 total, we want to make sure that they're not going to be hurt as we cut programs. But as a general rule, I want to cut TANF and food stamps and unemployment insurance.
Tell me what TANF is.
It's what we used to call welfare, temporary assistance for needy families. There's the earned income tax credit and child tax credits and healthcare tax credits.
So you'd also get rid of credits as well as expenditures.
Well, credits are expenditures.
That's credit are expenditures.
Anything that's administered through
the
the
earned
tax
income tax
code.
credit, the child tax credit are two of the biggest expenditures.
Sure. I want to radically simplify the tax code.
Yes.
So again, if we have the basic income and it's tax-free, then you could have a kind of flat tax that libertarians and conservatives have been calling for.
And so
that,
who wins and who loses? And I'd love to hear from both of you. Like, if we're doing this, right, we're saying we're going to do the
bureaucrats
radical
lose,
thing.
period.
Bureaucrats lose.
How?
The special interests.
Wait, how do bureaucrats... When you say bureaucrats, you don't mean politicians. You mean government agencies.
I mean, yeah.
We would do away with some government
agencies. And the government and the politicians who actually...
pull the levers.
Who pull the lever. And
they wouldn't have any more levers.
No, it's one check that goes. Right. There's no more deciding who gets what for what reason, putting people through hoops of proving that they're this or that. It's like in all the the big question with disability is like it's expanded massively because it's included a lot of things that are not provable, and so then a lot of people are pointing the fingers like, oh, there's a lot of cheaters. All those conversations are gone. They're gone because it's like you get the money. It doesn't matter that you have back pain or you have like a child or you have a house or you're renting, because that's the system we have. We have an incredibly unfair system where basically the government decides to reward having a child, owning a house, and like all these things. But that's gone. And so the bureaucrats and the people who feed off that system. They are the losers.
I want to make it clear, because I think that there's two classes of people when we talk about the government, and I think that most people conflate them. Politicians are bought and sold. People who work in government have jobs and do their jobs. So you're saying that the politicians, just so I'm clear, the politicians would now not have those levers to pull. They wouldn't be driving the economy as much. The economy would be more of a laissez-faire. It would be kind of free. Right, there wouldn't be burdens on some people and not on others, and then some agencies would naturally just kind of go away because we wouldn't be using them. These people would lose
their job.
They would lose their job,
but they will have the basic income, and some of them will be full-time parents, and some of them will be artists,
gainfully
and some
employed.
of them will start their own businesses
in the productive world.
No dig against the government worker.
So, but getting back to Steve World, as you called it, one of the strong arguments that I like to make is that when we have a basic income, we can begin to see progress on a wide range of other issues. For example, a lot of corporate welfare is military spending. And every time we listen, even to the most liberal Democrats, vote for military spending when it creates jobs in their states or districts. When every individual has a basic income, government will no longer be in the business of creating jobs for people. People will have the basic income while we find or create jobs for ourselves. All of our friends who are strong environmentalists and are concerned about climate change and global warming, many of the leading advocates for action argue for a carbon tax or carbon fee and dividend. So raise the price on carbon and other forms of pollution and distribute some of the proceeds to offset any negative effects.
Let's talk about that for a second. So, I believe that one of the things that government does well is all the things that we collectively don't get done. Like, we're not going to collectively have our own military and on and on and on. What would we then say about things like the environment and carbon tax? How would we have a government that puts their finger on the scale when we have those kinds of issues? If we're saying, look, we're not going to have these any more taxes around these things.
We'll still have taxes, and the government will still be serving. We're only talking about, getting rid of all the current welfare system. So it's not the military. It's not. There's a lot of other things. Schools. All of this is untouched. I mean, this is not affecting this, right? So,
but if we're saying that the government, we're taking power away from some of the politicians.
We have to be careful with these abstract terms, the government. And
yes.
You began to tease some of that out in terms like the economy and the market. And one of the ways that I really emphasize basic income and why I argue that it is imperative is that it truly restores power to individual citizens. It's about empowering individuals to make the choices that are best for themselves and their families and their communities.
So we're winding down, but I want you to tell people what can they do, because
I do.
Go ahead.
If I can just say,
please, we can go on
one
forever.
of the reasons, everything that King Steve has said about what would need to happen is a reason why I it won't happen. The interest.
So you think it's a good idea, but you're a pessimist.
Well, no, I cannot agree to that system until we have the guarantee that King Steve is in power and everything he said about getting rid of everything and making sure it does not come back happens. Because otherwise, it is a train wreck for, honestly, an economy that is already, or government is already on a fiscal train wreck. So if you add this to everything else and you really do not guarantee that you get rid of everything else, it will be we'll be in an even bigger financial disaster than we are in without even reaping the benefits of a simpler system. And so unfortunately that's the real difficulty is the interest groups that have built the system as it is right now. Like the Democrats are against it because they're always saying no, we actually lag this kind of different categories of because we believe that we can tell poor people better to them, because it's unbelievable the number of Democrats who have no respect for low-income people.
Well, let's be clear. When we talk about Democrats and Republicans, I don't think it's the people, the citizens who believe those things.
No,
it's the politicians who are being bought by the systems that keep these people, these laws in place.
I've talked to a lot of reporters who tell me, but it means that lower-income people are going to, like, you mean you're going to trust them to spend this cash on, like, they're going to be like, using drugs instead, as if just because you're poor, you have no interest in actually bettering your life and taking care of your kids and putting food on the table. I find it's particularly offensive, but
yeah, but it's not because we're talking again the thing. It's not the Democrat or the Republican.
No, but it's surprising. It's surprising the number of liberals who actually like this paternalistic system that we have at the moment. And so
we're gonna quickly break the show, but we're gonna keep talking. So we have a few more minutes. So real quickly, Stephen, thank you for being on the show. How would people get a hold of you? And we're going to continue the show. You just got to listen to the rest of it on our Mixcloud site or on iTunes.
My book is Basic Income Imperative, and the easiest way to get a hold of me is Stephen@basicincomeimperative.com, and there's a website, Basic Income Imperative, which is just the placeholder for right now. And
how can people get a hold of you if they'd like?
The Mercatus.org is our website, and you can, if you go on there, you'll find me.
Okay, we're going to keep talking, because this is a really cool conversation. So go ahead, continue.
I have major issues with the current system. It just doesn't work well, and it's paternalistic, and it's.
So when we say paternalistic, because you said it a few times, what do you mean? So people who
I
are
mean
listening
that the government.
understand.
It means that the government decides how much lower income people can spend on food, how much they can spend on housing, how much they can spend on a variety of things, instead of actually assuming that people are a responsible body who should be making the decisions for themselves. Because when you're in a tight budget, some month I assume, right? It's like your real need is healthcare. Other month it's education. Other month is actually food. And so the system we currently have is very rigid. Not to mention all the difficulties to be able to get it, to get the. So it's a system that's. That's I think is problematic, and having just like cutting a check to people is just much better.
Okay, so I want to hear I'd like to hear you as the Queen of America. What would you do? Because I hear that you're definitely frustrated. I think we all share your frustrations. I don't think it's productive for us to say this is a liberal idea or a conservative idea, because I don't really think it captures the people's true sentiments, and also I think it puts us against each other. But for the purposes of the conversation, how would you change it? If you could just magically snap your fingers, what would you get rid of? What would you put in place? And how could we live in peace and prosperity?
Like Steve, I would absolutely get rid of everything in the system, and it would have to. For me, as the Queen, I would have to be assured that these programs cannot come back. There are country, you've said it, is in a really bad fiscal path. We can argue why that is, but it is. It's a reality, and if we don't get rid of everything, this is just adding to the problem. So you would have to get rid of everything and guarantee also that they won't be coming back.
Sure. Okay, so we get rid of everything.
Yes.
We guarantee it's not going to come back. The next day we give people, how much money would you want to give people?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess, you start with $500 a month and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I
now,
also think...
now let me ask a question there, because we're talking about giving people money. Who decides how much they get would be the politicians.
Well, so I think kind of there are people who we would have to decide, figure out what's an amount that's helpful, and also be very careful about the disincentive to work again, because
what if I become president and say, okay, everyone gets $10,000 a month?
Well, the initial amount is somewhat arbitrary, right? And so you can say $500, and then it might.
But what are we trying to achieve, right? So for me in my work, it's always data driven. What is it we're trying to achieve? We want to have this percentage of this. What's the goal?
The goal is to eliminate extreme poverty, hunger, and homelessness. Well,
what's the poverty?
Well, it depends on the country, right? I mean, there are countries where people live on less than $2 a day.
There are many Americans who are living on less than $2 a day in rural areas.
Yeah. So let's talk about what would be the goal for us.
The goal is to have a more just and sustainable society.
Is there a measurable term, though? Would we decide, okay, look, before we do this, we're going to pick a number that people in New York City are going to get X, people in
if it's a national program, I think it's going to be, say, $500 to everyone nationally.
Regardless of where they live.
And then local and state governments, where the cost of living is higher, can supplement that from local revenues.
Because they're now not doing some of these social programs. But again,
that creates the incentive to cut and simplify at the local and state level.
But how would I know that I hit my numbers? I'm at the right balance. I got the equilibrium of giving people the right amount of money, not too much, not too little.
You can't start from that abstract perspective. It's not a balance sheet.
Okay, well, people are going to ask these questions.
Well, but you can't know. The reality is that government officials putting in place a program often pretend that they know, but they don't know.
Right.
I mean, there's a pretense of knowledge in this town in particular, in the Washington, D.C. area, that we know things that we don't know. So you're going to have to start somewhere. But in my opinion, you really will also have to put in place real safeguards. So for instance, because the pressures from interest groups are going to come back, coming back constantly to actually change the system.
And I think the real safeguard is an empowered citizenry. And we saw the Tea Party movement rising up and demanding major cuts in government, and we saw Donald Trump calling for drain the swamp. And I think when everyone has a basic income, everyone will have an immediate stake in making government more responsive and accountable, and in eliminating those programs.
So the thing that I believe there's only one thing that we as Americans can do to change this, and that's to vote. Because if we're not voting, it doesn't really matter. This is a great idea. And then we talk about a lot of great ideas on this show. None of it's going to happen. No one's going to go this is great until we're all voting. Because honestly,
we have to be citizens.
They don't care about us.
But it has to be, it's a great idea done. It's a decent idea done right.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing with you.
No,
I think you made it really clear about we have to get rid of everything.
And
people are pretty smart, right? I agree with what you're saying.
And
I think
unfortunately, there are very few politicians who will be standing there saying, "Yeah, I'm going to do this." And
but if everyone voted, I'm going to. So here's where I take it. If everyone, and I mean in the 90 percentile of people are voting, then the politicians will have to do what their constituents want us to do.
Right.
Not what the rich people tell us. 85% of elections that are won by the guy with the more money.
A lot of F's here. And also a lot of assumption that actually people will not be asking
people to take action.
So for this on top of everything else. A lot of people would love to see this on top of everything else.
Sure. But if you're talking about, to
me
as a citizen,
I will be with you fighting for cutting programs and making
So will
sure
I.
that that's
So
sustainable.
will I. I think people listening to the show,
Okay,
when they
it's
understand
three
the
of us.
concept. Four of
I
us.
think
Afote?
most
Huh? Afote's on board.
most everyone I talk to agrees that we need to cut and eliminate programs, and the more quickly and deeply we cut, the
Yeah,
better.
I think that there's I
And-
want you to know that I think that maybe there's some biases that we all have about how certain people feel about things, but I think generally speaking, we all want it to work. The mechanisms of getting it to work is what we're talking about.
And what I'm talking
right?
about,
But we all want to
say,
have a great economy, a great society. We want our lives to be better than our parents were, and we want our kids to have better lives than we did.
And it's going to take a peaceful democratic revolution, and that's why, yes, we all have to vote, we all have to be citizens, we all have to demand something more akin to what the founders were talking about with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and a government that operates by the consent of the governed to ensure our safety and happiness.
But until the governed all vote,
Absolutely.
we're still going to be, like you're saying, people are going to, because if we're all like saying this is what we want, and I get behind what you're saying, and I don't think anybody I know wouldn't get behind what you're saying, because it makes sense.
Actually, I can tell you that a lot of people don't get behind what I'm saying.
Well, I think that they have agendas. If they have political agendas or
Wait,
money
but
agendas.
that's an if
but
that
if it
you
works,
can't. If no one had a political agenda, if no one, and I will say people, even people who want to keep these programs the way they are, they genuinely believe that this is for the welfare of the recipients. I'm not even. You don't even have to assume.
True.
Heartlessness.
People have good intentions.
Yeah,
Yes.
have good intention.
Right.
And in fact, there's a great book called by John Cogan at the Hoover Institution that was published in November. It's called the High Cost of Good Intention, and it's basically a history of looking at all these government program, all these what we call entitlement programs, these welfare program, and they all started with good intentions and where they've led us and how they've evolved, because government grows by serving special interest. That's how government grows. And the thing that we have to understand is it grows by concentrating the cost on a few concentrating the benefits on a few and spreading the benefit. So people,
Spreading the
spreading the cost so people don't actually kind of realize that they're,
right.
And so these are forces that not only are going to be unbelievably powerful, and we're not just talking about big corporations because they don't have a fight in the game. I mean, but
I disagree.
If you say corporate welfare, of course, but it's not just them. It's just there are a lot of people and special and entrenched interest in keeping the system the way it is. And once it is in place, you're going to have to put safeguards in place to keep it the way it is. Otherwise, it'll jeopardize.
I'm going to say we're going to leave it there.
Sorry.
Because we've gone over.
Steve.
But again, I want to say thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on the show. This was a very lively conversation. And I think the people who are listening, all 5 of you, now have some new ideas about what the world could be. So thanks again. And
Thank you.
We'll be back next week on The Lauren Epstein Show. I'm your host, Lauren Epstein, here on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia.